Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. Story 1. The laughter that never was. The last thing I remember before the car crash was my sister's laughter from the back seat. I don't have a sister. That haunting, melodic sound echoed in my mind as I woke up in a hospital bed, surrounded by the sterile smell of antiseptic and the distant beeping of monitors. My head throbbed, and my vision blurred, but the memory of that laughter remained crystal clear. It gnawed at me, a sharp reminder of something that should not exist. "How are you feeling, Mr. Harris?" a nurse asked, her voice a blend of concern and professionalism. "Like I've been hit by a truck," I replied, trying to mask my confusion with humor. "What happened?" "You were in a car accident." "You're lucky to be alive," she said, checking my vitals. "Do you remember anything about the crash?" I hesitated, the memory of the laughter surfacing again. "Not much. Just a sound. Someone laughing." The nurse gave me a puzzled look. "There was no one else in the car with you when they found you," she said, and with a comforting pat on my arm, she left the room. I spent the next few days recovering, each moment a blur of medical procedures and rest. But the laughter lingered. It haunted my dreams, turning them into twisted nightmares where a shadowy figure with my eyes and a sinister smile watched me from the darkness. Every time I woke up, the fear clung to me like a second skin. Discharged with a clean bill of health, I returned to my apartment, hoping to find solace in the familiarity of my own space. But the moment I stepped through the door, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air was heavy, thick with an oppressive silence that set my nerves on edge. I walked through each room, half expecting to find something out of place. The living room was as I had left it, with books scattered on the coffee table and a blanket draped over the couch. The kitchen smelled faintly of the last meal I had cooked, and my bedroom was untouched. Yet, something was off. It was as if an unseen presence was watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. That night, as I lay in bed, the memory of the crash replayed in my mind. The laughter, the sudden swerve, the impact. It all came rushing back, accompanied by a cold, eerie sensation. I turned on my side, trying to shake off the unease, but sleep eluded me. Then, in the dead of night, I heard it again. The laughter. Soft, distant, yet unmistakably coming from the other side of my bedroom door. My heart pounded as I sat up, straining to listen. The sound grew louder, more distinct, and my blood ran cold. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. I got out of bed, my legs unsteady, and approached the door. With a deep breath, I turned the handle and pulled it open. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the moon outside, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I stepped into the hallway, feeling the cold tiles beneath my feet. The laughter echoed again, this time from the living room. I moved cautiously, my heart hammering in my chest. As I entered the living room, the laughter stopped, replaced by a whisper. "Come play with me." "Hey, subscribe for more scary stories." I froze, the whisper sending a shiver down my spine. The voice was soft, almost playful, but there was an edge to it that filled me with dread. The living room was empty, just as I had left it, but the shadows seemed to dance around me, mocking my fear. I took a hesitant step forward, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of the source. "Come play with me," the voice repeated, closer this time. It was a child's voice, innocent yet chilling. I turned towards the sound, my breath catching in my throat. There, in the corner of the room, stood a little girl. She was no more than 6 years old, with long dark hair and eyes that gleamed in the moonlight. She wore a white dress, stained with what looked like dirt and blood. Who are you?" I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. The girl tilted her head, a smile spreading across her face. "Don't you remember me, brother?" she asked, her voice echoing in the room. "We used to play together all the time." Panic surged through me. "I don't have a sister," I said, backing away. "You're not real." She giggled, the sound piercing the silence. "Oh, but I am real. You just forgot about me." but I never forgot about you." I shook my head, trying to make sense of the situation. This had to be a nightmare, a lingering effect of the accident. But the fear was too real, the coldness of the room too sharp to be a dream. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" She took a step forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "I want to play, like we used to. But you have to remember, brother. You have to remember everything." The air around me grew colder, and I felt a pressure on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Memories that I couldn't place began to surface, fragments of a past that didn't belong to me. A house in the woods, a swing set, a little girl laughing as we played hide and seek. But it didn't make sense. These weren't my memories. "Stop," I pleaded, clutching my head. "I don't understand." The girl stopped, her expression softening. "You will," she said gently. "But you have to come with me." Before I could respond, the room began to spin, the shadows closing in around me. I felt myself falling, the world fading to black. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in my apartment. I was standing in front of an old, dilapidated house, its windows boarded up and the paint peeling off in strips. The air was thick with the smell of decay and mold. "Where am I?" I muttered, looking around. The girl stood beside me, her hand slipping into mine. "Home," she said simply, pulling me towards the house. "Come on, brother. It's time to remember." I followed her, my mind reeling. This place felt familiar, like a forgotten dream. The door creaked open as we approached, revealing a dark hallway lined with family portraits. I recognized the faces in the pictures, but the details were hazy, like a photograph out of focus. "This way," the girl said, leading me to a room at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly ajar, and a soft light seeped through the crack. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn back, but the girl squeezed my hand reassuringly. As we stepped into the room, I was hit by a wave of déjà vu. Toys were scattered across the floor, and a small bed sat in the corner, its sheets neatly tucked in. The walls were covered in drawings, some faded with age, others fresh and vibrant. "Do you remember now?" the girl asked, looking up at me with hopeful eyes. I nodded slowly, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. This was our room. Our home. But something terrible had happened here, something I had buried deep within my subconscious. Before I could speak, the door slammed shut behind us, and the temperature dropped. The girl stepped away from me, her expression shifting from innocence to malevolence. "Now, let's play," she said, her voice echoing with a sinister edge. The sudden change in her demeanor sent a jolt of fear through me. The room darkened, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist, coming to life around us. I felt a cold breeze brush against my skin, carrying with it the faint, eerie sound of children's laughter. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice shaking. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We used to play all the time, but you left me alone. Now it's my turn to play with you." The room transformed before my eyes. The walls stretched, the ceiling rose, and the floorboards creaked as if the house itself was breathing. The drawings on the walls seemed to move, shifting into grotesque images of faces twisted in pain. I stumbled back, my mind struggling to grasp the reality of what I was seeing. "Remember the game, brother?" she asked, her voice echoing. "Hide and seek." A surge of memories hit me, fragments of a past life I had forgotten. I saw myself as a child, running through this very house, hiding in closets and under beds while the girl counted. But there was something more, something darker that my mind had repressed. "You were never supposed to leave," she whispered, her voice now cold and filled with a deep sadness. "You promised to stay with me forever." I shook my head, trying to clear the confusion. "I didn't know," I said, my voice barely audible. "I don't remember." Her eyes flared with anger. "You will," she hissed. "And then you'll stay with me, just like you promised." The room began to spin again, and I felt myself being pulled into the darkness. I fought against it, but the pull was too strong. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the void. When I opened them again, I was no longer in the house. I was standing in the middle of a dense forest, the trees towering above me like ancient sentinels. The air was thick with fog, and the only sound was the distant rustling of leaves. I turned in a circle, disoriented and terrified. "Where are you?" I called out, my voice echoing through the trees. "Right here," the girl's voice replied, but it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and spun around to see her standing there, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Because you forgot me," she said simply. "And I can't let that happen." I took a step back, my mind racing. "What do you want me to do?" She tilted her head, her expression softening slightly. "Remember. Remember everything." As the words left her lips, memories began to flood my mind. I saw flashes of our childhood, playing in the woods, laughing together. But there were darker memories too. I remembered the accident, the crash that had killed her. The guilt I had carried, the way I had blocked out the pain by erasing her from my memory. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry." She reached out, her hand gentle on my cheek. "It's not enough," she said softly. "You need to stay with me." The forest around us grew darker, the shadows closing in. I felt a chill run through me as I realized what she meant. She wanted me to join her in death, to stay in this limbo forever. "No," I said, stepping back. "I can't." Her eyes hardened. "You don't have a choice." Before I could react, the ground beneath me gave way, and I was falling into darkness once more. I landed hard, the wind knocked out of me. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the house, lying on the cold, hard floor of the room we had shared. The girl stood over me, her expression unreadable. "It's time to play, brother," she said, her voice echoing with finality. I pushed myself up from the floor, my body aching from the fall. The room felt even colder now, the air thick with a sense of impending doom. The girl stood before me, her eyes glowing with a sinister light. The shadows in the room seemed to pulsate, alive with a malevolent energy. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice cracking with fear and desperation. "Why won't you let me go?" She tilted her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. "You left me alone," she said softly. "You broke your promise. Now, you have to stay with me." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of confusion and fear that clouded my thoughts. "I don't understand," I said, my voice trembling. "What promise?" She stepped closer, her eyes boring into mine. "You promised we would be together forever. But you left me. You forgot about me. Now, you have to remember." The room around us began to shift, the walls melting away to reveal a dark, twisted version of the forest where we used to play. The trees were gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground beneath my feet felt unstable, as if it could give way at any moment. "Come with me," she said, holding out her hand. "Let's play one last game." I hesitated, my mind racing. I didn't want to play her game, but I knew I had no choice. I took her hand, feeling the coldness of her touch seep into my skin. She led me through the twisted forest, the shadows closing in around us. We stopped in a small clearing, the moonlight casting an eerie glow on the scene. In the center of the clearing was a small, decrepit playhouse, its paint peeling and its windows broken. It looked just like the one we used to play in, but twisted and corrupted by time. "This is where it happened," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is where you left me." The memories came rushing back, hitting me like a tidal wave. I remembered the day we had played in the forest, the way we had laughed and chased each other. And then the accident. The car swerving off the road, crashing into the trees. The last thing I heard before the darkness took me was her laughter, so out of place and haunting. "I didn't mean to leave you," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't mean to forget you." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and anger. "But you did," she said. "And now, you have to stay with me. Forever." The ground beneath us began to shake, and I felt a cold hand grip my heart. The playhouse started to crumble, the shadows closing in around us. I felt myself being pulled into the darkness, the coldness seeping into my bones. "No!" I screamed, fighting against the pull. "I won't stay here. I won't let you take me." Her grip tightened, her eyes blazing with a terrible fury. "You don't have a choice," she hissed. "You belong to me now." I fought with every ounce of strength I had left, trying to break free from her grasp. But the darkness was relentless, and I could feel myself slipping away. In my last desperate moment, I remembered something. A fragment of a memory, a promise I had made to myself. "I will remember you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I will never forget you again." The world around me seemed to pause, the darkness hesitating for a moment. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. "Promise?" she asked, her voice softening. "Promise," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I will remember you. Always." The grip on my heart loosened, and I felt myself being lifted out of the darkness. The forest began to fade, the shadows retreating. The last thing I saw was her face, a sad smile playing on her lips. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my apartment, lying on the floor. The room was cold, but the oppressive feeling was gone. I got up slowly, my body aching, and looked around. The house was silent, but the memory of her laughter still echoed in my mind. I knew I would never forget her again. She was a part of me, a part of my past that I could never escape. But as long as I remembered her, she would never be alone. And neither would I. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Echoes of Morning. I woke up to the sound of my mother calling me for breakfast, which would be normal if she hadn't passed away in this very house 3 years ago. The familiarity of her voice sent a shiver down my spine as I sat up in bed, my heart pounding against my ribcage. It was unmistakable, the lilting cadence, the affectionate warmth that had once filled our kitchen every morning. For a moment, I wondered if I was dreaming, but the cold sweat on my forehead and the gnawing fear in my gut told me otherwise. The room was bathed in the early morning light, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe on the walls. I hesitated before getting out of bed, my mind racing through every logical explanation. Perhaps it was a trick of my memory, a cruel hallucination. But deep down, I knew the house had never been normal since her passing. There had been whispers, fleeting shadows, and a coldness that seeped into my bones no matter how high I turned up the thermostat. I dressed quickly, my fingers trembling as I buttoned my shirt. The hallway outside my bedroom felt longer than usual, the air heavy with an unseen presence. As I approached the kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon hit me, the same way it had every morning of my childhood. The kitchen was exactly as she had left it, every detail meticulously preserved in my grief. But today, something was different. "Mom?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The clinking of plates and the soft hum of an old tune responded, yet no figure stood at the stove. The chair at the head of the table, where she always sat, creaked as if someone had just risen from it. My legs felt like lead as I forced myself to move forward, my eyes scanning every corner for a sign of the impossible. Then, I saw it, a shadow that moved with intent, not just a trick of the light. It slid across the floor and up the wall, pausing at the spot where my mother's favorite portrait hung. My breath caught in my throat as the shadow seemed to solidify, taking on a more human shape, albeit distorted and ethereal. I blinked hard, hoping to dispel the apparition, but it remained, growing more defined with each passing second. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice firmer than I felt. The shadow shifted slightly, almost as if acknowledging my presence. Then, a whisper, faint yet unmistakable, filled the room. "It's me, darling. Don't you recognize your own mother?" Terror and disbelief clashed within me. I wanted to run, to leave this cursed house behind, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The shadow moved closer, and as it did, the room's temperature plummeted. Frost began to creep over the windows, and my breath came out in visible puffs. "Mom, how is this possible?" My voice quivered, betraying the fear I tried to suppress. The shadow hesitated, then slowly raised what appeared to be a hand. "I never truly left, my dear. I've been watching over you, waiting for the right moment to return." There was a sorrow in her voice, a longing that tugged at the edges of my consciousness. As much as the logical part of me screamed to reject this, my heart ached with a desperate hope. Before I could respond, the sound of a door creaking open echoed through the house, followed by heavy, deliberate footsteps. They were not my father's. He had left this world soon after my mother, unable to bear the weight of his loss. No, these footsteps were different, filled with a menacing purpose that set every nerve in my body on edge. The shadow of my mother seemed to shudder, and she whispered urgently, "You must hide. He's coming." "Who? Who's coming?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. But the shadow only repeated her warning, "Hide, now." I had no choice but to obey, the primal instinct to survive overriding every other thought. I darted into the pantry, closing the door just enough to see through the crack, my breath shallow and silent. As the footsteps drew nearer, a figure emerged at the threshold of the kitchen, tall, gaunt, and cloaked in an aura of darkness that seemed to swallow the light around it. I could see nothing of its face, but its presence alone was enough to chill me to my core. It paused, as if sensing my hiding spot, and then it spoke in a voice that was both a growl and a whisper, "I know you're here. You cannot escape me." I pressed myself against the back wall of the pantry, my heart thundering in my chest. The figure moved through the kitchen with deliberate slowness, its every step sending vibrations through the floor. I could barely breathe, terrified that even the slightest sound would give me away. From my hiding spot, I watched as it seemed to sniff the air, its movements jerky and unnatural. Come out, wherever you are," it crooned, its voice a grotesque parody of a nursery rhyme. The sing-song quality made my skin crawl, and I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. The shadow of my mother flickered at the edge of my vision, her form less distinct, as if struggling to maintain her presence. The creature paused by the pantry door, and I could see its fingers, long, bony, and tipped with blackened nails, trailing along the wood. It seemed to sense my fear, reveling in the terror it caused. I closed my eyes, willing myself to be invisible, to become part of the darkness. For a few agonizing moments, everything was silent except for the pounding of my heart. Then, abruptly, the figure moved away, its attention drawn elsewhere. I let out a shaky breath, daring to hope that it hadn't found me. But the reprieve was short-lived. The kitchen lights flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the walls. The air grew even colder, and I could hear a low, guttural growl emanating from the creature as it searched the room. "Mother," I whispered as quietly as I could, "what is that thing?" There was no answer, only a sense of urgency that pressed down on me like a weight. The shadow that was my mother seemed to be directing me to something, but in my panic, I couldn't understand what. The creature let out a frustrated snarl and began overturning chairs, smashing plates, and upending the table. It was looking for me, growing more furious with every passing second. I knew I couldn't stay hidden much longer. My eyes darted around the pantry, searching for anything that could help me. That's when I saw it, a small, rusted key hanging on a hook by the door. It was old, an heirloom that my mother had always been oddly protective of. Without fully understanding why, I reached for the key. The moment my fingers closed around it, I felt a strange warmth spread through my hand, as if the key itself was alive. The creature stopped suddenly, its head snapping in my direction. It knew. I clutched the key to my chest and held my breath, waiting for the inevitable. But instead of tearing the pantry door off its hinges, the creature seemed to hesitate. It let out a low, keening wail that was almost human, and then it began to retreat, slinking back into the shadows from whence it came. The kitchen fell eerily silent, the oppressive weight of the creature's presence lifting slightly. I stayed hidden for several more minutes, too terrified to move. Finally, when I was sure the creature was gone, I crept out of the pantry, the key still clutched tightly in my hand. The kitchen was a wreck, the aftermath of the creature's rage evident in the shattered dishes and overturned furniture. "Mom," I called softly, "what do I do now?" The shadow of my mother reappeared, more defined than before. She drifted toward me, her ethereal form radiating a sense of urgency and sorrow. "The key," she whispered, her voice a mere breath of sound. "It opens the door to the past. You must find the lock, but beware, he will follow." I stared at the key, its intricate design hinting at a long-forgotten history. "The past? What do you mean?" I asked, but the shadow was already fading, her energy spent. "Find the lock," was all she said before disappearing entirely. The house seemed to close in around me, its walls a silent witness to the horrors that had unfolded. I had no choice but to trust my mother's words, cryptic as they were. The key was my only lead, and somewhere in this old house, there was a lock that it would open. As I made my way through the hallways, the floorboards creaking underfoot, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The house, with its dark corners and hidden memories, was alive with the echoes of the past. And somewhere in the shadows, the creature waited, hungry and relentless. With the key in hand, I ventured deeper into the house, each step echoing through the silent halls. The house had always felt imposing, its Victorian architecture filled with nooks and crannies that seemed to hide secrets. Today, it felt more like a labyrinth, every turn and shadow a potential hiding place for the creature. The key seemed to pulse with a strange energy, guiding me towards some unseen destination. I found myself in front of the old library, a room my parents had loved but which had been locked since their deaths. The door was heavy, made of dark, polished oak, and it bore a lock that looked ancient. My hands shook as I inserted the key, the metal cold against my skin. With a click, the door swung open, revealing the library's dim interior. Dust motes floated in the beams of light that filtered through the heavy curtains. The air was thick with the scent of old books and forgotten memories. I stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath me, and closed the door behind me. The room felt safe, insulated from the malevolent presence that stalked the halls. But I knew it wouldn't last. The library was filled with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, each crammed with volumes that covered a myriad of subjects. In the center of the room was a large, ornate desk, and behind it, a portrait of my mother in her younger years. Her eyes seemed to follow me as I moved, a reminder of the task at hand. I began to search, opening drawers and scanning the shelves, looking for any clue as to what the key might unlock next. My search was interrupted by a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. It seemed to come from behind the bookshelves, a soft susurration that sent chills down my spine. I approached the source of the sound, my breath shallow, and began pulling books off the shelf. My fingers found a hidden latch, and with a tug, a section of the bookshelf swung open, revealing a narrow passageway. The passage was dark and foreboding, the air colder than the rest of the house. The walls were lined with old portraits and photographs, faces that seemed familiar and yet distant. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the key clutched tightly in my hand. The door closed behind me with a soft thud, plunging me into near darkness. I followed the passage, the walls pressing in on me as I moved deeper into the house's hidden recesses. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, and I could almost make out words among the murmurs. The passage ended at a small, unassuming door, the wood aged and cracked. There was a lock, and with a trembling hand, I inserted the key. The door swung open to reveal a small, dimly lit room. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it, an old, leather-bound book. The room was otherwise empty, the walls bare except for a single, small window that let in a sliver of light. I approached the pedestal cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The book was covered in dust, the leather cracked and worn. I brushed off the dust and opened it, the pages yellowed with age. The book was filled with writings and symbols that I couldn't understand, but one page stood out. It bore a sketch of a door and a key, along with a single word, resonance. I traced the drawing with my finger, a sense of recognition washing over me. This was the key to understanding what was happening, to unlocking the secrets of the house and my mother's presence. As I turned to leave, a sudden chill filled the room. the shadows deepened, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I wasn't alone. The creature had found me. I could hear its raspy breathing, feel its malevolent gaze. My escape route was blocked, the narrow passage now a trap. The only way out was through the small window. I rushed to the window, prying it open with desperate strength. The wood splintered under my hands, but it gave way, opening just enough for me to squeeze through. As I pulled myself out, I felt a cold, bony hand brush against my ankle, a final, grasping attempt to capture me. I kicked free and fell to the ground outside, the book clutched tightly to my chest. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not daring to look back. I could hear the creature's enraged howl echoing from the hidden room, a sound that would haunt my dreams. The house loomed behind me, a dark silhouette against the morning sky. I had escaped, but I knew it wasn't over. The book held answers, and somewhere in its pages, I would find a way to end this nightmare. With the old book clutched tightly to my chest, I stumbled away from the house, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The early morning light felt alien, a stark contrast to the darkness within the house. I found refuge under a large oak tree, its gnarled branches offering a semblance of protection. My mind raced as I flipped through the book, desperate for any clue that could help me understand the horrors I faced. The book's pages were filled with cryptic symbols and indecipherable text, but a recurring motif caught my eye, the same key and door sketch I had seen earlier. Next to it, a series of drawings depicted a ritual, one that seemed to involve invoking and binding spirits. As I studied the drawings, a plan began to form in my mind. If this book held the secrets to binding spirits, perhaps it also held the key to banishing them. I spent the next few hours piecing together what I could from the book. It described a ritual that required specific items, a mirror, a candle, and a personal artifact belonging to the spirit. I knew exactly where to find these items within the house, but the thought of going back inside filled me with dread. Still, I had no choice. If I wanted to end this nightmare, I had to confront the creature and perform the ritual. With renewed determination, I made my way back to the house. The air seemed to thicken as I approached, the oppressive atmosphere weighing heavily on me. I steeled myself and stepped inside, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of the creature. The house was eerily silent, as if holding its breath in anticipation. I first went to the attic, where my mother's old belongings were stored. Among them, I found a hand mirror, tarnished with age but still intact. Next, I retrieved a candle from the dining room, its wax slightly melted from the last time it was used. Finally, I made my way to my mother's bedroom, where her favorite locket lay on the dresser. The sight of it brought a pang of sadness, but I knew it was necessary for the ritual. Armed with the required items, I returned to the library. The hidden passage was still open, a gaping maw that led to the heart of the house's secrets. I set up the ritual in the small room where I had found the book, placing the mirror, candle, and locket in a circle as depicted in the drawings. The air grew colder with each passing moment, and I knew the creature was close. I lit the candle and began to recite the incantation from the book. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but I pushed through, my voice growing stronger with each syllable. As I chanted, the shadows in the room began to twist and writhe, converging towards the circle. The temperature plummeted, my breath visible in the freezing air. The creature emerged from the darkness, its form more defined and terrifying than before. It let out a guttural roar, the sound reverberating through the room. "You cannot banish me," it hissed, its voice a mixture of rage and desperation. "I am bound to this house, to your blood." I ignored its words and continued the incantation, focusing on the locket. It began to glow, a soft, golden light that seemed to push back the darkness. The creature howled in pain, its form flickering like a dying flame. "Leave us!" I shouted, my voice echoing with newfound strength. "Return to the void from which you came." The creature lunged at me, its claws outstretched, but it was too late. The ritual reached its climax, and a blinding light filled the room. The shadows recoiled, the creature's scream a final, chilling note before it was pulled into the mirror. The glass shattered, the pieces falling to the floor with a sound like distant thunder. Silence fell, the oppressive weight lifted from the air. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted but relieved. The house seemed different, the malevolent presence gone. I knew it was over. The creature was banished, and my mother's spirit was finally at peace. As I stood up, the morning light filtered through the small window, casting a warm glow over the room. I looked at the pieces of the broken mirror, a sense of closure settling over me. The house was no longer a place of fear, but a place of memories, both good and bad. I left the hidden room and made my way to the front door, the book still in hand. As I stepped outside, the sun rose higher, banishing the last remnants of the night. I knew there were still questions unanswered, but for now, I was content. I had faced my fears and emerged victorious. As I walked away from the house, I couldn't help but glance back one last time. The shadows were gone, the house standing silent and serene. I took a deep breath and continued down the path, ready to embrace whatever came next, free from the echoes of mourning. The end. Subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.